Shalom. Shalom, brothers and sisters. Giving honor and praise unto the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular teaching, brothers and sisters, this particular lesson, this particular PowerPoint, brothers and sisters, you will see is to help set truth back in the earth. Okay, it is called From Madagascar to Manhattan, the Atlantic slave trade. Okay, so, brothers and sisters, without any further ado, we want to sit there and take note, brothers and sisters, of the PowerPoint and looking at it on the left-hand side. The old slaves were killed for reading. The new slaves won't read if it killed them. Now, the reason why I pointed that particular meme out, brothers and sisters, is because unfortunately it does hold truth. You understand? This is not what we may want to call, brothers and sisters, truth to power. We want to call this one here truth to acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of the fact, brothers and sisters, that many of our people do not read. And this is not to take any quote unquote shot or disrespect to any brother or sister. You understand? Now, this is not to be haughty or anything of that sort. I remember I was told from a person on Facebook, that if I were to put the book that I wrote in ebook format, that is to say, if it was to be made where somebody can just sit and listen to it, then that person will sit there and purchase it. The situation and the problem, brothers and sisters, with that particular thing is you are on Facebook already. So the writing inside of the book is already larger in fonts, brothers and sisters, than what you're already typing on Facebook. Just admit you just don't care to read. It's understandable. It's what it is for your life. You understand? And so this is something we just want to point out for edification purposes. So when you look at this particular PowerPoint, right, on the right-hand side, it says from Madagascar to Manhattan, the matter of the Atlantic slave trade. Now, let's go on, if we will, and look at the bottom of this. All right. And I want to show this, if we will. All right. With the laser pointer. Slave market, foot of Wall Street. Brothers and sisters, Wall Street is in Manhattan. The trains in New York that go there are trains such as the 2 train, the 4 train, and so forth and so on. Wall Street is the same vicinity, brothers and sisters, where the stock exchange exists. The stock exchange is a block or so away from where George Washington was inaugurated as president in the year 1789. George Washington used to live in the state of New York in what we call Mount Vernon, which is north of the Bronx. So, brothers and sisters, this is just something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right? So, brothers and sisters, from Madagascar to Manhattan, the matter of the Atlantic slave trade. Without any further ado, let's go on. I suggest you get your pens and your pads of paper for this presentation. Shalom. The point in such presentation, due to the periodic claims that the Atlantic slave trade did not go west, it became incumbent to present such information as we will see here. The presentation is a part 4 of a matter regarding the Atlantic slave trade. It should be noted, the Atlantic slave trade, said as AST in this particular regard, is not denied by top-notch scholars in or outside of current academia. Now, what is the point in me mentioning that? You're not going to find a scholar, say inside of a college, or say retired from a college, say inside of a high school, or say retired from teaching inside of a school, that is going to sit there and deny the Atlantic slave trade. There is so much evidence and so much proof of such. We want to sit there and point out that it must be some kind of game that is made by some in order to sit there and deny such. As pointed out, it is Black people who took the baton of the quote Southern planter. Let's stop there. When we sit there and see, brothers and sisters, the term Southern planter, we're talking about the slave master in the South. All right. So when you read books on slavery and you read about the planters, that's not the black people that they're talking about. All right. As pointed out, it is black people who took the baton of the southern planter and basically going to bat for the whites to ask blacks of evidence of the AST of the Atlantic slave trade. So recently, I would say, to the best of my knowledge, within the past 10 years or so, or maybe less than 10 years, there has been videos made, presentations done that are trying to sit there and allude to the idea that the Atlantic slave trade never came west. That is the game that has been played. If you begin to see what's going on now, where people talking about reparations for slavery, if we as black people are saying that slavery did not really happen the way they say it happened, then by default, we are also saying we are not due any reparation. Now, that's the game that's being played. Another thing to point out, brothers and sisters, is for those who understand the stance that I took, I say that reparations is not that we not do it, it's the fact that they cannot afford it. You don't have the ability to pay, and you cannot afford, brothers and sisters, after separating somebody's family. There's nothing that you can sit there and give as a monetary aspect for such. You understand? When the guy in Maryland was killed by the police by the name of Freddie Gray, his mother took the money that the city offered. So therefore, the cops who were guilty of such will never ever be prosecuted because you took the payment. The retribution is in part the reparation. And as we know, it says eye for eye, life for life, tooth for tooth, hand for head, hand for hand. So there is, brothers and sisters, no amount of currency on that funny money, which is really a debt bearing note that one can offer to sit there and say, okay, well, here's for the reparation. No, brothers and sisters. The whole concept, and this is from what I understand of the ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, asking in part for reparation from the government. And then you got Georgetown University recently saying, oh, okay, $27 is now taken away for reparations for black people. This is their way of trying to atone for their own wickedness. We should not sit there and give into that aspect of the handout. Us as said black people, we cannot do what the said Native Americans have done and say, well, we'll give you this casino for all the evil we've done to you. You can't be the guilty party and then you be the same one to sit there and state what you're going to give as restitution. In the Torah, brothers and sisters, we begin to see that the Most High is speaking about eye for eye, life for life, hand for hand, stripe for stripe, brothers and sisters. The guilty party doesn't sit there and state what should be the atonement for such. And it's not to sound disrespectful or harsh, but when you are in the wrong, no disrespect, you really don't have no rights. That's why we got to try to remain as right as possible. You understand? So without any further ado, we begin to see what's going on. Note the game that is played. Next slide. A response when I was called a effing moron. Now, I just hyphenated it, but the person who called me that didn't hyphenate nothing. I was called a effing, you know what that word means, moron by somebody in the YouTube world when I was discussing something about what Christopher Columbus was about. So my response to that person, all right, is as follows. Oh, we use a profanity? Question mark. Amazing. That is what American schools have people doing to get a point across. When they realize the idea of the video is trash? Question mark. The guy said, speaking of the video that we were talking about, the guy said the rights we have, we get from the aspect of Columbus? Question mark. The president of this country, while saying make America great, quote, again, does not even respect the places that America has as Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Not too long ago, the president of the United States, current president of the United States, was noted for saying that he spoke to the president of the Virgin Islands, not realizing that he is the president of the Virgin Islands. He is noted for speaking about Puerto Rico and the people in Puerto Rico as if they were given things from the USA. not realizing that the people in Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens. So this man's racism, this man's buffoonery and foolishness actually caused him to not even be able to see the places that he has control over. You understand? The disrespect that this man has, that the country is vying for in certain cases, shows that he doesn't even know what he's presiding over. So let's go on, brothers and sisters, to the next part. Speaking of myself, I read the diary of Columbus. He never came to what is called the current United States, from Florida to Maine, from Oregon to California. So what exactly did he discover? Question mark. Imperialism. The museum in New York, because your language shows the degree of what American schools alone expresses profanity, called the Native American Museum, which is actually located at Bowling Green Station in Manhattan, relates the truth of how Columbus cut arms off of Indians who did not give him enough of their gold. According to Michael Bradley in his book, The Columbus Conspiracy, the idea that Columbus brought to Isabella and her husband was that of imperialism. He set sail in 1492, the same time the Moors were ousted from Spain, and 50 years after Henry the Navigator soldiers were already involved in the Atlantic slave trade. So we have to take world events to understand why Columbus would even care to travel to, quote, explore. And if we are going to use profanity, while asking if one went to school, because that's what the guy asked me, oh, you effing moron, did you even go to school? Right? Going to use profanity while asking if one went to school, it shows what American schools, leave some, have to use as a defense in a simple discussion on the internet. Have a good day. And that, brothers and sisters, was a response that I gave to somebody who was saying and promoting a video that was saying, we have the rights and the freedom today and the liberties today because of what Columbus did. And he was saying in this kind of great country. But the issue I wanted to point out, as in that particular slide, is that Columbus never came to this country. Columbus went to places called San Salvador, Barbados, Jamaica, and places such as Venezuela. The place that, excuse me, that the current president called S-hole country. That's what Donald Trump said about the places that Columbus went to. So when you see a video, as this particular PowerPoint here is addressing, when somebody sits there and says, oh, we are great in this place right here, and we are doing great things because of what happened with Columbus in this great country. What great country are you talking about when Columbus never set foot in this country from the Florida Keys all the way to Maine, going all the way west to Washington State and Oregon, going all the way south to San Diego, California? He never set foot in the states here. And Puerto Rico is disrespected by the current president that says he wants to make, quote, America great again. So this is how you know when you're dealing with a person who is more so in their feelings than in wisdom, who's dealing more so in folly as opposed to reasoning. Because all it takes is a little bit of study and reasoning, because studying without reasoning is why Ecclesiastes says, much study is a weariness to the flesh. Because if you don't have any reasoning in it, there is no absolute concrete foundation of what you're talking about. All you do is just go in sight with no kind of reasoning and foundation of what you're talking about. You all over the place. The conscious community does that. I call it the African hoppers. And what I mean by that is we go to the north. Then when we have to, we'll jump the Kush. Then when we have to, we can jump the Kemet. Then when we got to, we can sit there and jump back to Kush. Then we can sit there and use Nigeria when we get your foundation solid. The house of Israel, we saying that our true land is what you call the land of Israel in Jordan today. That's us. That's what we're saying. We may talk about the diaspora, but we're saying our home is that land over there in the east. So we are saying and laying a foundation for it to be known for edification purposes. You understand? So let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. Can they afford the reparations? The definition of reparations: money that a country or group that loses a war pays because of damage, injury, deaths, etc. it has caused. Something that is done or given as a way of correcting a mistake that you have made or a bad situation that you have caused. Reparation. Now, let's look at this, and I want to highlight this, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. It says here, correcting a mistake. Now, let's look at the definition of mistake, right? It says, so we can gain something for edification purposes, an action or judgment that is misguided or wrong. Brothers and sisters, slavery was not a mistake. In the book Deuteronomy 28:15-68, which I wrote, which is on Amazon or Lulu for those interested, I spoke of the records regarding the fact Black people were not allowed to read. Slavery was not a mistake. It was not a mistake that they made sure that we could not read. It was not a mistake, brothers and sisters, that they made sure they broke the family up. It was not a mistake, brothers and sisters, that they used Barbados as a way to, quote, break the slave before shipping him or her to other places. It was not a mistake that they used to sit there and say, do you think it was an El Nino or El Nina? And they cut the pregnant Black woman open and stepped on the baby's head. That was not a mistake. It was not a mistake that they cut out the Black woman's vagina and wrapped it around their head as an ornament. It was not a mistake that they kicked the Black man's head around like a soccer ball. Brothers and sisters, that was not a mistake. It is not a mistake that what they like to call Thanksgiving has the turkey shaped in the head of what they call the Native American. And every so-called Thanksgiving, they got the Redskins and the other team sitting up there playing against each other. That's not a mistake, brothers and sisters. It's not a mistake, as we're going to point out, that New York City has 1646 as an area code. And 1646 is when the people was brought from Brazil over to what we call Manhattan as slaves. They are memorializing it. That's not a mistake, brothers and sisters. It is not a mistake, brothers and sisters, to be noted for edification purposes. When they sit there and pardon the language, I ask you please to pardon the language. It is not a mistake that there was a place in Virginia called Niggerfoot. Did you know that? There's a place in Virginia, they now call it Negro Foot, but it was called Niggerfoot. That's not a mistake, brothers and sisters, that there's a part in Virginia called Lynchburg, where they used to sit there and hang Black men. It's not a mistake that downtown Manhattan is called Wall Street because they used to have Black people lined up against the wall. So you cannot sit there and give reparations, because reparations is for something that you do, as stated, correcting a mistake. So, of course, we're going to hear, well, it also says, a bad situation. Brothers and sisters, it was not, and we want to point this out, a bad situation of those things that happened with our people as addressed. It was a horrible situation, a wicked situation, an uncompromised situation. You can sit there and listen to that rapper married to the white women if you want to, talking about slavery was a choice. You can sit there and listen to that if you want to. Or you can begin to see like, no, something was not what that was. You understand? Next slide. Madagascar and Manhattan. What we're looking at right here is part of, or actually is Madagascar. And this is the continent of Africa, and it shows you there where it's at. This here is the island of Manhattan. Now, I want to point something out for edification purposes, and I want to circle this, all right, so we can begin to see something. This area right here that you're seeing circled, that right here is the vicinity that we call Harlem, for the most part. Upper part of that is what you call Washington Heights, where our brothers and sisters from Dominican Republic is at. Down over here, and I want to color code this a little different, all right? Let's do it in black. Right over in this vicinity here is more so what you call Alphabet City. Now, what am I pointing out by Harlem and Alphabet City, brothers and sisters? is that is where the crack ran through rampant in the 1980s. That is where guns ran through rapid in the 1980s. So post-slavery, the situations that happened with us as a people, you cannot give reparations for because it was not a mistake. So this is why I made sure I put this picture here, all right, in the aspect of hope, if you will, when it says Hebrew women before we fell. I'm not a woman, but it just goes to show, brothers and sisters, how it would have been or could have been, and how it was in certain cases once it came down to us understanding who we are as the house of Yisrael. I remember seeing women dressed like that inside of the camp as a child. You understand what I'm saying? And to be quite candid, as a man, you see women who present themselves as that in a different light than you see women who present themselves in a different manner. That is the truth. You understand? So let's go on with the time allotted to the next slide. Matters regarding Mad and Man. Now, Mad stands for Madagascar and Man stands for Manhattan. The name is from the Portuguese in 1500, named by Diego Diaz. Madagascar. Madagascar is the fourth largest island in the world. The travel from the airport in New York to Madagascar is over a day. The name Manhattan is of Native American Lenape origin. The meaning of Manhattan is Island of Many Hills. Manhattan was colonized by the Dutch in 1609. That's the same year that Henry Hudson sailed that river that is between New York and New Jersey. Blacks were brought there in 1646. It was named New York in September 1664. So these are things, brothers and sisters, that we want to point out for edification purposes. All right? The Dutch did bring black people to what we call today the island of Manhattan in the 1640s. All right? So when they try to always quote, oh, Anthony Johnson in 1655 was the pioneer of American slavery. This is what takes us back to the first part of this presentation when it says that some people will not read if it killed them. Next slide. The Dutch and the black man. In 1664, the British, as noted, captured the island to be Manhattan from the Dutch. Blacks were shipped to Manhattan from Brazil. What do we want to point out in that particular regard? All right. Okay, that one color didn't work. We're going to have to do it, let's say, in this. Blacks were shipped to Manhattan from Brazil. What is people in Brazil native to Brazil? Perhaps. What is people in Brazil already shipped there by the Portuguese and the Dutch from Angola and Africa? Let's see. The Dutch gave up what they had in New York and focused more on an area known as Suriname. So, brothers and sisters, all right, this is something that we want to sit there and point out for edification purposes. All right. Are there any questions or comments concerning what we've gone over so far? Any questions or comments concerning what we've gone over so far? All right. Questions, comments concerning what we've gone over so far? All right. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. Note the date of the matter. Let's go. Now, what do I mean when I say note the date? I'm talking about what you're about to see circled right here. You see that right there? That says in this particular painting here, 1643, Dutch, selling who? Understood commonly as a black man, but we understand as of the house of Israel. So, brothers and sisters, what are we pointing out for edification purposes is this. Let's go on. The Dutch was in the island that we call Manhattan of today, and they were there until the British came along. When the British settled in New York, New York became a colony, brothers and sisters, in the year 1664. Georgia became the last colony in 1732. The colonies ended when the United States was created in the year 1776. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right? Benjamin Franklin, the scientist, stated the following. Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so far an opportunity, by excluding all blacks and tawnies, or increasing the lovely white and red? Benjamin Franklin knew good and well that there were black people inside of here prior to the Atlantic slave trade. Now, the issue that this video wants to address is that due to the fact that there were black people, as called here black or tawny, in this particular case here, right? By the way, the Romans called the Arabs tawny. You understand? So getting back into this particular aspect, brothers and sisters, that does not exclude the fact that there were people from Africa who were black that were shipped over here to the Western Hemisphere, just because you already had black people that were already here that were black. Because what that does, if you was going to use that term black, what you've done is you just marginalized the black man in the world by saying, well, there were black people over here in the West. Yes, there were. Therefore, that means there were no ships from Africa bringing black people over as captives. That doesn't hold true. Because then, once again, you have just marginalized the existence of the global black man's population. You understand? We extend outside of Africa. We extend outside of what some want to call Turtle Island. We extend outside of America or America, whatever pronunciation one may want to have of Africa or Akibalan or any other terminologies of these particular lands. We, as the black people, not only the Israelites, but all nations of people of color, quote unquote, black people, extend outside of just current America, quote unquote, Turtle Island, quote unquote, America, quote unquote, the land of the West here, and outside of continental Akibalan or Africa, or whatever one may want to say. You understand? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Let's go on, if you will. All right. Thomas Jefferson, president, said the following. I advance it, therefore, as a suspicion only, that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time or circumstance, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of both body and mind. That was your good Thomas Jefferson, the one who was said to have a quote unquote wife by the name of Sally Hemings. Brothers and sisters, can we say that Sally Hemings was a willing participant with Thomas Jefferson? No, she wasn't. Because when Sally Hemings went over to the place that we call France and Paris today, she wanted to sit there and be kept over there. You understand? So this is something we want to talk about for edification purposes. Abraham Lincoln, the president, said this. There is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together. While they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. What did Lincoln say? Lincoln said, end quote, and I, speaking of himself, as much as any man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. Abraham Lincoln was not a black man. Give the white man back his leader, the said down low sodomite, Abraham Lincoln, the said dude who put black people back in slavery after a guy named Fremont. I'm going to write this out for those who care to look it up. Fremont Freedom. And you can check this out in a book called 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro by J.A. Rogers. Fremont freed them. Lincoln fired him and then put them back in slavery. You can sit there and keep Lincoln, white man. We don't need him. So the concept that says, well, Lincoln was black, maybe not in the sense of melanated, maybe in the sense of his spirit. You understand? That's not a person that we want to, if we want to sit there and quote, do a race draft, have among us. Give that dude back to his people. Next slide. Henry Berry, Virginia House of Representatives. We have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which the light may enter the slave's mind. If we could extinguish the capacity to see the light, our work will be complete. They would then be on a level of the beasts of the fields, and we will then should be safe. What is Henry Berry saying of Virginia House of Representatives? What are they saying? That in order for them to be safe, the black man has to sit there and not have lights. So in the Bible in Isaiah, when it says arise and shine, the light has come upon thee, who do you think Isaiah is talking to? Do you know in Isaiah chapter 51, it speaks about the people who were oppressed, who used to sit there and lay on their back and say, walk upon me? Who is known for being the ones who always having to lay down for somebody else so they can sit there and step upon them? The so-called black man, aka the true house of Israel. So these are things we want to talk about for edification purposes. All right. Now it's interesting. Why did I pick this date, the 15th of April, to do it? And it's not to sound mean, it's because this is the same day that Abraham Lincoln died in 1865. So if we look at brothers and sisters, we have in the calendar, pardon me, in the calculator, we have calculator, not calendar, myself talking to self, 2019, take away 1865. Today makes 154 years after the aspect of Lincoln getting his brains blown out, brothers and sisters, by the guy named John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in DC. And I go so far to say, as a person loving history, that that was commissioned by a guy named Stanton. Stanton, Edward Stanton, was part of the body for Lincoln. He was part of his members of his board. John Wilkes Booth blasted, put him to death. He shot him April 14th. He died April 15th. And I want to drop something. April 15th was a Shabbat. What is the Shabbat, O house of Israel? Can somebody type what that is? When we as Israelites hear Shabbat, what comes to your mind? Because there's a reason why I picked this date to do this presentation. So I'm asking, when we hear Shabbat, what do we hear as Israelites? Can somebody type that in the room? Rest, day of rest. Okay. Lincoln got blasted on a Friday night. Well, I'm not going into the night and day subject. That's not what we're talking about. He got blasted on a Friday night and died that Saturday morning. He died on the Shabbat. Brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters. There was a president before him by name Franklin Pierce. For those who want to sit there and get into history for edification purposes. All right? He was another president. Right? The 14th president. His children died in front of his eyes on the train. Did you know that? And this is not trying to play prophet. What does it say? Let my son go, that he may serve me. And if you refuse to let my son go, behold, I will slay thy son, thy firstborn, saith the Lord. So when we read about Egypt in ships, talking about what we're speaking of here in what we call America, just as the Pharaoh lost his son, so did Franklin Pierce, the 14th president, lose his son right in front of his eyes. So did Lincoln lose two of his sons right in front of his eyes. That's the hand of the Most High. This is not the turn of the cheek God that we've been fed to in Christianity. You understand? This is the God, may my mother rest in peace, that took his daughter, my mother, April 18th, back in 2004. May she rest in peace. What did Elohim say? I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. And there is none that can deliver out of my hand, saith Yah. So when we begin to see what happened with Neferhotep's son, who was supposed to be his successor in Dynasty 13 of Egypt, and we begin to see what happened with Franklin Pierce's son, who was supposed to have become a politician, two of them slain in front of his eyes. Lincoln, two of his sons, slain in front of his eyes. That's the work of Eloheinu, our God. Not the God that they gave us that sat there and said, everything's going to be all right no matter what you do. All you got to do is forgive. They're not promoting righteousness. Watch the people who talk about forgiveness more than righteousness. Righteousness trumps forgiveness. Because if you're dealing right, not that I'm or anybody else is perfect, but if you're dealing righteously, you have to find yourself less time to be forgiven. You don't have to keep on trying to harp on forgiveness if you work on your righteousness. So we may want to wonder about the people who keep on talking about forgiveness more so than righteousness. So let's go on and see what it is, brothers and sisters. Next slide. A short timeline. The time in which the Portuguese were in Madagascar is the same time in which the leader Ferdinand of Aragon suppressed the Moors in Granada. That's in Spain, by the way. Manuel, King of Portugal, marries Maria of Spain. Manuel was the successor of John II. John II was involved in the slave trade. He was mentioned in a video called From Ghana to Georgia, which is on his channel, by the way. The same time is when, I meant to put when, is when Brazil was discovered by Pedro Cabral in the year 1500. The same year, Columbus was arrested by Francisco de Barbodia. Did you know that Columbus was arrested? This is the same Columbus that another video on YouTube was saying, due to his deeds, we now have liberty and good things. He was arrested by the officers of Spain for lying to the Queen of Spain. Check the history out. Next slide. George Jefferson was told, you speak good English. Now, George Jefferson I'm talking about is the George Jefferson from the show The Jeffersons. There was a scene in there when they were speaking with a said person from Russia about the aspect of going to the UN, the United Nations, and so forth. And there's a part in there when George Jefferson in the show said to the Russian guy, hey, you speak good English. And the white guy, the Russian, said, so do you. I don't know if everyone watching that understood what was being stated, because English is not our language. The English New Yorkers were even more imaginative, establishing, after capturing Manhattan, establishing a good trade with the pirates in the Indian Ocean. The pirates having their headquarters in Madagascar. So you see how this is going, brothers and sisters. From Madagascar to Manhattan, let's go. Adam Baldridge having set himself up off Madagascar in the island of Saint Marie, traded with Felipes for slaves in exchange for rum and gunpowder. Next slide. Frederick and his son Adolphus matter with the black man. Frederick Felipes had a plantation in what is now Yonkers. Who knows where Yonkers is? Yonkers is in New York State, right outside of the Bronx. And for those who didn't know, you can get an idea. Yonkers is where the rapper DMX comes from. Yonkers, correct me if I'm wrong, is where the rap group called the Lox, LOX, comes from. I know DMX, the rapper, comes from Yonkers. I'm only mentioning that so we can begin to see what we're talking about, all right? He has successes who were like his son, Adolphus Felipes, bringing to New York nothing but Negroes. So what are we pointing out, brothers and sisters? You have this pirate that we see right here on the left-hand side. That's a pirate, that dude right there, right? Then we see Frederick Felipes, as we see right here. This is the point, showing what happened as far as the pirating and the people in New York. The pirates setting themselves up in Madagascar doing trade with people in what we call the state of New York. Next slide, please. Manhattan is in New York. South Sea Company. Created in the 18th century. We want to put the aspect of the laser pointer. Created in the 18th century and lasting about a decade, it was founded in London, involving English with the Spaniards in the slave trade. England wanted to rid itself of the debt it had accumulated. This was done in 1711 or so. All right? They created what they called the South Sea Company, the people of England, and took advantage of the Asiento matter that we spoke of in the presentation called From Ghana to Georgia, which is in the description of this video, by the way. So we see and want to point this out. Africa, as we see there. Barbados. We spoke about Barbados earlier because Barbados during the slave trade was where they would bring the captives and, quote, break them in to sit there and become, quote unquote, better slaves. Then we see North America. Now, I want to point this out by circling it for edification purposes, because this is part of the slave trade that many do not acknowledge, know, or think of. The slave trade that went north to Europe, to Lisbon in Portugal, then later on to Madrid in Spain. You see, the slave trade that went north to Portugal, that started with the workers of Henry the Navigator, for those who know the history. Henry the Navigator set that off, pardon me, his men set that off a guy named Goncalves in the 1440s, long before Anthony Johnson. But remember what the other guy said, we got to keep the blacks in darkness. So that way we whites can sit there and have something. Our knowledge of matters is their problem. Just like when I was a child and I stole something, the knowledge of it being known was my problem. Don't read the receipt. Don't read. Just take what I'm giving you as change and let me go back outside and play. I don't want you to do no research and figure things out and look at the price tag and so forth. That's what happens when you know you're not living right. Next slide. The white man was never your friend, black man. Now, I know that's a woman, but I put man there to be funny. You understand? I put the term not being funny, but was being funny by saying man, saying this person looks like a man when in actuality it is a woman. All right? I just want to be funny and humorous in that particular regard. Queen Anne of England lived from 1655 to 1714. We should note 1655 is when the Spanish and English fought over Jamaica. Queen Anne is noted as saying, I have insisted and obtained that the asiento or contract for furnishing the Spanish West Indies with Negroes shall be made with us for 30 years. brothers and sisters, she is noted for saying that in 1711 and 1712, in that era right there. That's their women saying that about our ancestors. I repeat one more time. That's their queens, their women saying that about our ancestors. Going to Nancy and Barbara because Ayana and Keisha get on your nerves, black man, is not the solution. Next slide. Governor Bradstreet's house of Massachusetts. This house was built in 1667 and survived several raids by Native Americans. Governor Bradstreet, and I want to sit there and underline that particular aspect, or we can highlight it. Governor Bradstreet of Massachusetts. Let's see something about this guy in Massachusetts. And let's point something out too. You do know when Jewish people were coming to North America, they went to places like Massachusetts. And if you know anything about business, they're usually the people called the middlemen. Let's go on. The matter with the governor of Massachusetts. There have been no company of blacks or slaves brought into the country since the beginning of this plantation for the space of 50 years. Only one small vessel, about 2 years since after 20 months voyage to Madagascar, brought hither, meaning here, between 40 or 50 Negroes, mostly women and children. What do you think they did with the women? Sold here for 10, 15, and 20 pounds apiece. What are we pointing out, brothers and sisters? Madagascar, Massachusetts. This video is called From Madagascar to Manhattan. We want to show the connection. So the governor of Massachusetts, whose house, as we've shown, was built in the 1660s, right? And when I highlighted the part that said only and vessel, it's not spelt wrong. When you're citing somebody, you got to put it the same way that they would have had it in like Old English. So that's why I wanted to show that. That's not a typo. All right? He said there have been no company of blacks or slaves brought into the country since the beginning of this plantation in the space of 50 years. Only one small vessel, about 2 years since after 20 months voyage to Madagascar, brought hither between 40 or 50 Negroes, mostly women. You got the governor of Massachusetts talking about black people as slaves brought to Massachusetts. What is the said quote unquote cottage community talking about? Well, there's no evidence of anybody talking about slave ships. That was something that black academia made. What are you talking about? You got the governor of Massachusetts talking about it in the 1600s. That's how you know who went to bat for who is defending who, and who team somebody is fighting for. You understand? Next slide. New York, where bodies are worth 2 for 5. The case, as I recollect it, was thus. There were several English and Dutch merchants of New York who had hired the ship called Fortune to fetch Negroes from Madagascar, as were every year usual with them. That was the governor, the colonial governor of New York that you see there on the right-hand side. So let's see something, brothers and sisters, and we want to point this out right here about what they called the ship Fortune to fetch Negroes, blacks. We know what Negroes is, from Madagascar. This dude that you see there, that right there was the colonial governor of New York. Let's see and get into this for edification purposes. So we already see the colonial governor of New York, and prior to that, the colonial governor of Massachusetts having cited about black people being brought as slaves to Massachusetts and the other to New York. Now, let's show where Madagascar is so we can get into this for edification purposes. From East Africa, question mark. After 1781, the slave trade from Southeast Africa grew rapidly. One famous place where captives were taken was Quiloming, a Portuguese trading post. Let's remember Portuguese, right? Before 1810, many were taken from the Makua people. After 1810, many were taken from the Yayo people. Next slide, because we already saw where Madagascar is. The Makua, a people from Eastern Africa. Brothers and sisters, the Quilomane thing is located in Mozambique, where the Portuguese had ruled. Madagascar, we already pointed out, was named by the Portuguese. The same people doing the trade here were the same people doing the trade here. You understand? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, right? We have here Mozambique, the Makua people. This is how some of them look. So let's go on to the next slide. Now this right here is what I would like to call the hammer. What do I mean by that? Sorry about that. Memories of Madagascar and Slavery in the Black Atlantic by Wendy Wilson Fall. You know that's a book that you can get on Amazon. And let's see the genre of this book here, speaking about slavery of black people from Madagascar. By analyzing contemporary oral histories, which is very important, as well as historical records, very important, and examining the conflicts between the two. Wilson Fall, which is her name, the author, carefully probes the tensions between the official and the personal, the written and the lived. She suggests that historically, the Black community has been a melting pot to which generations of immigrants, enslaved and free, have been socially assigned, often in spite of their wish to retain far more complex identities. Innovative in its methodology and poetic in its articulation. This book, which is something I suggest people pick up, this book bridges history and ethnography to make studies of diaspora, ethnicity, and identity into new territory. I wanted to read that bottom part first so we can gain understanding of what this book is that you can get on Amazon. So let's go on to the top part. All right. And I want to use the laser in this particular regard. From the 17th century into the 19th century, thousands of Madagascar's people were brought to American ports as slaves. In Memories of Madagascar, the book, and Slavery in the Black Atlantic, the subtitle of the book, Wendy Wilson Fall, which is the author of that book. I told sisters there's women writing books. There's no reason why Wendy should be the only one on Amazon. My sisters, write your book, sister. Let's go on. Wendy Wilson Fall shows that the descendants of these Malagasy slaves in the United States maintain an ethnic identity in ways that those from the areas more commonly feeding the Atlantic slave trade did not. Generations later, hundreds, if not thousands, of African Americans maintain strong identities as Malagasy descendants. Yet the histories of Malagasy slave sailors and their descendants have been little explored. What is that portion talking about that book? is that the people, brothers and sisters, from Madagascar that was brought over to New York, as we showed from other sources prior to this slide, brothers and sisters, is talking about us in New York having roots in Madagascar. And I want to jump the gun, if we will. The book Babylon and Timbuktu speaks about Israelites that, guess what, scattered to Madagascar. But that's for another presentation. So let's go on to the next slide. We just getting started, not for the novice. Let's go on. The Yayo speak a Bantu language known as Chyao. They also speak the official languages of the countries they inhabit: Swahili in Tanzania, Chichewa and Chichumbuka in Malawi, and Portuguese in Mozambique. By 1800, which is the year 1800, the Yayo had become known as traders, plying between the inland tribes and the Arabs on the East Coast. Most of this trade was in slaves, which led eventually to clashes with European powers who were establishing control over the former Yayo territory in the 19th century. The Yayo were never united but lived as small groups ruled by chiefs who were predominantly military and commercial leaders. By 1900, all Yayo chieftains had come under German, Portuguese, or British rule. Now, I want to point this out for edification purposes, and I want to underline something, if we will. All right? Let's look at right here. The Yayo were never united. Then it says, by 1900, all Yayo chiefdoms had come under German, Portuguese, and British rule. You get the point? Not being united is how the Europeans came over and took over. Same thing with the Maccabees. Later on, there was the dissension between the Hasmoneans, like the situation with Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus. The Romans, like under Pompey, took advantage of the Israelites that were disunited. The government of the United States took advantage of the fact of what happened in 1972 when the Crips killed a blood member over a leather jacket and fueled the beef between the Bloods and the Crips even worse than what it was prior to that time. The European from the era of the Maccabees to the era of what we're talking about in East Africa to the era of what we're talking about in Los Angeles in the 1970s has always made sure the people were divided in order for them to sit there and have control. Next slide. Quilomane, the matter. Quilomane, town and seaports. East Central Mozambique. I want to put this with the laser pointer. It is situated near the mouth of the Bones Senese River on the Indian Ocean, as we can see right here, right? It was founded by the Portuguese as a trading station in 1544. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, that's to say the 17th and the 1800s, had a slave market. Quilomane became a Portuguese colonial town in 1761, and 2 years later was established as a concejo, which I believe that's the pronunciation, meaning a township. So the Portuguese, we said earlier, we want to remember that particular aspect. You understand? We wanted to remember that particular aspect because when you go into the video that's inside the description, it talks about the Portuguese having black people brought over to the state of New York as slaves in the 1730s. That's why this becomes important. Next slide, if we will. The matter of Brazil, part 1. Of the new sites on the list, none has a darker past than Valongo Wharf. Built in 1811, the wharf functioned as South America's leading slave port. It was here that as many as 900,000 enslaved African men, women, and children were held before being sold on the British slave market. Those who did not survive the ordeal, who died during the transatlantic journey, or sometime after arriving at the wharf, were buried in mass graves nearby. The massive stone wharf loomed over Rio de Janeiro's harbor, serving as the arrival point for nearly 1 million enslaved Africans during the first half of the 19th century. That is to say, during the first half of the first 50 years between the year 1800 and 1850. Today, the ruins of the Valongo Wharf are the only physical remains of a slave trade port left standing in the Americas. So what we're looking at is the wharf that is talking about. Right here shown on the left-hand side, that's the Valongo Wharf in Brazil, where many of our people were brought over and dropped off as enslaved. Do we see where we're going with this? The conscious community side that says, well, we don't know about slavery, there's no evidence of the ships. Oh, we're going to get into that. You understand? They are fighting against our people. The people who are sitting up there, and I hate to have to say it, the ADOS, and we want reparations. No, 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 no. You're not getting that by. You can't sit there and tell the people, well, just take this payout with the money that we created in a mint, so therefore we won't have to sit there and face judgment. You're going to face it like the ancient Egyptians did. You're going to face it like ancient Babylon did. You're going to face it like ancient Assyria did. The reason why the Greeks, and you find aspects of Persia still in some kind of existence, and Rome still in some kind of existence, is because the book of Daniel says their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. But eventually, that fourth beast shall surely be consumed. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Now, Brazil is shown here on the map on the top right-hand part where Rio de Janeiro is. This is the Valongo Wharf, as we were talking about. Are there any questions or comments concerning what we're talking about? What you're looking at on the left-hand side, brothers and sisters, is a picture that was painted in 1867 about the ancient Egyptians enslaving the Hebrews. And I want to circle the part that the painter in the 1860s said were the Hebrews. These were the enslaved. The Europeans who painted this picture knew the Hebrews in ancient Egypt being enslaved were black. As Rudolph Windsor, may the Most High continue to bless his life, pointed out that Israelites being enslaved in ancient Egypt, brothers and sisters, was one black nation enslaving another. Next slide. The matter of treaties. This becomes important. In the name of the most holy Trinity, and I'm just reading it, I don't believe the Trinity is holy, it having been stated in the second additional article of the treaty signed at Madrid on the 5th day of July of the year 1814, between His Majesty, the King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and His Majesty, the King of Spain and the Indies, that, quote, His Catholic Majesty concurs in the fullest manner in the sentiments of His Britannic Majesty, Britannic meaning Britain, England, okay, with respect to the injustice and humanity of the traffic in slaves, and promises to take into consideration with the deliberation which the state of his possessions in America demands, the means of acting in conformity with those sentiments, and engages, moreover, to prohibit his subjects carrying on the slave trade for the purpose of supplying any islands or possessions, excepting those appertaining, to Spain, and to prevent, by effectual measures and regulations, the protection of the Spanish flag being given to foreigners who may engage in this traffic, whether subjects of His Britannic Majesty or of any other state of power, Now, this is what we're reading about the treaty that was made official in 1817. All right? In 1817, brothers and sisters, between Britain or England and Spain. Let's go on to see what they say in this matter. Right here, it goes to say, His Catholic Majesty engages that the slave trade shall be abolished throughout the entire dominions of Spain on the 30th day of May 1820, and that from and after that period, it shall not be lawful for any of the subjects of the crown of Spain to purchase slaves or to carry on the slave trade on any part of the coast of Africa. Let's stop right there. I wanted to stop right there, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. What does this treaty state between England and Spain? It says what for edification purposes, right? We want to highlight this. Or to carry on the slave trade on any part of the coast of Africa. So when you find people saying, well, they weren't really taken out of Africa, they had a treaty about this between England and Spain, a treaty, which means you had governmental officials talking about this. Like we spoke about the colonial governor of New York, the colonial governor of Massachusetts. What are these unauthored, have not acquired, not to be haughty, a degree, nor do they sit there and apply themselves to study. I want to emphasize something. A lot of the people who sit up there talking about the slave trade never happened, they're not college graduates. Because in college, you're going to have to talk about Western Civ 1 and Western Civ 2. Western Civilization 101 is a required class in college. And in it, they cover the slave trade. That's why I said earlier about academia. This is why I personally wonder about those who despise college. I'm not saying college is for everyone. What I'm saying is to sit there but like you have a vendetta against it shows that that's not good. Especially if you talk about Africa. Oh, you had the university in ancient Egypt in Waset. You had the university in Timbuktu named Sakori. All of those different things with that, and you still hating on school? I don't know what to say, but let's go on. Upon any pretext or in any manner whatever, provided, however, that a term of 5 months from the said date of the 30th of May 1820 shall be allowed by completing the voyages of vessels which shall have cleared out lawfully previously to the said 30th of May. So in other words, if there's any vessels that are filled before the 30th of May, just let them go by. That's part of their treaty. And we already shown where it says about the coast of Africa in their treaty. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. The treaty that was made, part 3, Article the 5th. One of the objects of this treaty on the part of the two governments being mutually to provide their respective subjects from carrying on an illicit slave trade. The two high contracting parties declare that they consider as illicit any traffic in slaves carried on under the following circumstances. First, either by British ships and under the British flag, or for the account of British subjects, or by any vessel by under any flag whatsoever. Second, by Spanish ships upon any part of the coast of Africa, north of the equator, after the exchange of the ratifications of the present treaty, provided, however, that 6 months shall be allowed for completing the voyage of vessels comfortably to the tenor of the second article of this treaty. Third, either by Spanish ships and under the Spanish flag, or for the account of Spanish subjects by any vessel or under any flag whatsoever after the 30th of May 1820, when the traffic in slaves on a part of Spain is to cease entirely, provided always that 5 months shall be allowed on the completion of voyages commenced in due time comfortably to the first article of this treaty. Fourth, under the British or Spanish flag, for the account of the subjects of any other government. Fifth, by Spanish vessels bound for any port not in the dominions of His Catholic Majesty. Brothers and sisters, don't want to deny the slave trade happened? Are there any comments or questions concerning what we just went over? This is a treaty that was made official in 1817, and the date that they're talking about it going into full effect is May 30th, 1820. They're naming dates and lands and people and actions. The conscious community, in part, that says, oh, well, there was no slave trade. You don't know what you're talking about. This treaty would have never been in existence. Let's go on to the next slide, if we will, brothers and sisters. Not for the novice. The gentleman you see there on the picture is one of the two signers of the treaty in 1817. This treaty is full evidence of the slave trade of the slave trade regarding ships from Africa to the Americas were in use. As stated from the introduction of this presentation, part of the reason for this is because of the periodic claims that there were not ships used during the enslavement of our ancestors. Any questions concerning what we're talking about? Let's go on to the next slide, brothers and sisters. A matter in 1781, laying back from the video on his channel called From Ghana to Georgia. A list detailing the names, ages, and prices of slaves bought by British plantation owner William Philip Perrin from a man named John Broomfield in 1796. We want to point out that in 1796 is when the island of Jamaica, there was also the war between the British and the Maroons in Jamaica. This is something we want to talk about for edification purposes. Now, let's see what we're looking at. This is part of what was shown as far as the enslavement goes concerning our people. Men age 40, 50, 30, 25, and they gave them names. I guess that says Salon, Jack, Tom, Duke, and David, and so forth and so on. And so they sit there, list of Mr. John Broomfield's with their ages and so forth. These are the slaves that he acquired and named and so forth. Not too hard to figure what we're looking at and talking about. What are you talking about? The slave trade did not happen. All right, we already went over that. Next part. From Assyria to America, a future book to come. Assyrian release, Hebrews in captivity. We went over that picture in other presentations. Another capture, 1630. 5 years after the census of 1624 to 1625 was taken, from which it appears that there were 22 Africans in the colony at that time. An important addition was made to the slave population by Captain Gray, who during a cruise in the ship Fortune of London had encountered a vessel loaded with Negroes from the Angola coast, captured her, and brought her cargo into Virginia. This cargo was exchanged there for 85 hogsheads and 5 butts of tobacco, which were afterwards transported to England for sale. Written by Bruce, it's Economic History of Virginia in the 17th Century, Volume 2, page 73. So you may want to look that up. Now I want to highlight it for edification purposes. First, we want to highlight this part right here, Hebrews in captivity from the Assyrian matter. Then we want to highlight this part right here so you can sit there and look this up in your own time for edification purposes. See what this is talking about? Said the ship Fortune of London. Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back. Back, 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 Ack, 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 ack. See? English. And then we see right here, brothers and sisters, the ship Fortune. So let's see where we shown this later on. All right, so we can begin to see something for edification purposes. Right? And right here, as pointed out, brothers and sisters, we see the ship Fortune of London. London's in England. See how it connects? Let's go on and conclude out, brothers and sisters. But why did I go here, which is kind of like in the third part, kind of seemed kind of off the subject? Somebody decided to make that meme against other Israelites with different understanding. And I thought it was quite disrespectful. Right? So, the Hebrew word you see that's between these images of the same person is the word wahit makaratem. The Old Testament based brother, not to be haughty myself, explains what some tried to disrespect others on. So, brothers and sisters, when I saw this particular meme that floated around on Facebook, and then after I wrote the book, Deuteronomy 28, 15 to 68, I'm not going to name who because it's not for edification purposes to name who. I got an inbox from somebody that said, how did you parse Deuteronomy 28, verse 68? That was done in a video. But see, if the person or whoever got the book that I wrote on Deuteronomy 28, they would have seen that the book mentioned the video. Then you could have looked up the video and saw how it was parsed. But obviously you didn't get the book, but that's okay. So let's see what we're talking about. Weheshib kaya mizrayim ba'aniyot. Ba'derek asha amarti laka lo tosif o lir'ota. Now let's look at this, brothers and sisters, right? And we want to highlight this particular part right here for a reason. And we want to highlight this kwamat for a reason. So let's go on, because this was, to me, very disrespectful to do that to any brother, regardless of one's understanding. Now, the word that is talking about right here, wahit makaratem, hit pa'el, second, masculine, plural, perfect, while consecutive. Brothers and sisters, that right there, what you see, the hit pa'el, second, MP, MP means masculine, plural, perfect, while consecutive. We don't talk like that. I conduct Hebrew classes. When you talk Hebrew, you don't sit there and say Dalit Kaf or Dalit Patak Kaf. That's not speaking Hebrew, brothers and sisters. If you got to name the vowels when you're talking, you're not a speaker in the language. The format of Hebrew, blessed be the Most High, that I enforce and teach, brothers and sisters, you'll learn the alphabet, then the vowels. Once you understand that, you become a reader. Once you go from becoming a reader, you build your vocabulary. My suggestion, learn a vocabulary that you use on a regular basis. After you learn that particular aspect, you get your dictionary and you build on from there. So you begin to start speaking. From there, you learn your grammar. Once you now have graduated from reading, building your vocabulary, and now your grammar, you now become a speaker. Then you get into things like a lexicon and so forth and so on. But this meme that had gone around on Facebook is very disrespectful to any Israelite camp. You understand? So that's why these brothers, or actually the same person, happens to be what you call messianic. That's why I titled this particular PowerPoint slide which said the Old Testament based brother, namely myself. Because when I wrote the book that you see there, as part of the video in the lower right hand part, I parsed this chapter, pardon me, that verse, verbatim. But there were people who asked me who have never gotten the book and therefore did not see the part in Appendix B where I cited the video so one can watch where each particular part, what was the prefix, what was the suffix, what was the verb, what was the pronoun, what was the adverb, what was the past tense, what was the future tense, what was the present tense, what was the while consecutive, was all said in the video. So how you going to ask a brother about a book and ask one particular part about it when you've never gotten it? I'll tell you why. Because it's the same people and energy who made this kind of meme to disrespect another black man. That's why we have to ask who is on whose side and who is battling and who is going to bat for who. Always got to ask that question. You understand? Because instead of trying to help a brother or a sister, somebody decided it was a good idea to try to make a meme and disrespect somebody. You understand? You are no different than Abraham Lincoln and no different than Benjamin Franklin and no different than Thomas Jefferson. You're fighting on their team when you disrespect your people like that. You hope that brother would have never perhaps come to the light of understanding the language as many other Israelites do. That's why when we read earlier about the guy that said, as long as the blacks stay in darkness, we, talking about the white man, can sit there and have some kind of light. You understand? That's why a brother, not to be haughty, was asked, why did you parse that? Because I know y'all niggas don't understand this. That was the spirit that was being presented. And I apologize for that word being used because I was asked not to use it. You understand? You did not expect somebody to sit there and get up into that particular aspect. So let's see the word that they keep on or that is consistently spoken of. We want to highlight this and we want to sit there and talk about this for edification purposes. Right? Now let's look, brothers and sisters, at the pen aspect. Right? The part you see circled is a wow. In biblical Hebrew, they have what's called the wow hakupuk, aka the wow consecutive. Now, without that, this word would normally been in the past tense. But because of that wow there in biblical Hebrew, the past tense word becomes future tense. Now, let's color code the other aspect in the pen so we can begin to see what we're talking about. In red, all right, heat. Heat pa'el stem, generally treated as either the fifth or the seventh of the seven stems, is generally understood as the reflexive in Hebrew. That is to say, something done to self. So let's look, brothers and sisters, at the next particular part, because this meme, not to be in my feelings, kind of had me what they call tight and upset. You understand? And I thought it was very disrespectful. Instead of helping somebody, you trying to debase a brother or a sister. And I ain't even gonna mention who made this meme, by the way. I ain't gonna do that. I'm not gonna sink to that level. We just gonna expose this meme as a false, like we expose other ones on this channel as false. Right? My car, shown there in the green, circled. My car means to sell, also means to devote. Did you know that? The same Ben Yehuda dictionary that tells you the word makar means to sell also means to devote. This same root word, hit maker, in the hipael stem, is what is used in the Bible in 2 Kings 17, verse 17, when it says, and they gave themselves over to mischief, speaking, they sold themselves out. So when we read in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, trying to say, oh, that means you shall sell yourselves, it also means you shall devote yourselves to your enemies as what? As it says right here, shown with the laser, for male servants and female servants, wa'ain quone, and there is no purchaser. And I say this in due respect. If your level of Hebrew, brother or sister, is remaining in a parsing stage, and you have to make memes in English and disrespect other Israelites because of a difference of understanding in English, then you stay speaking the same language that Lincoln spoke, that Jefferson spoke, that Washington spoke, that the colonial governor spoke of Massachusetts and New York that said the black man is a slave. You keep speaking his language and let those brothers and sisters who want to sit there and understand and learn something of the Most High and maintain a humble spirit and not a defamation spirit of character. Let them learn. Don't keep people in a parsing state, as some brothers on Facebook do. Well, the reason why we stay with the parsing, the reason why you stay with the parsing is because you can't get the people to speak. That's why. So, because your classes, and I say there's no disrespect intended, remains in a parsing state, as we see the meme right here, you can't edify them no more, so you now insult the people. It's just like the conscious community. When the Israelites were not debating the people in the Kemethi no more, everyone with Sarnetta's group wound up debating each other. So when the parsing community was not advancing, no offense intended, to speaking, then you now see them having to go to this level to try to insult somebody else. Next slide. Now, getting back, brothers and sisters, to what we're talking about. Calculations of the slave ship. Now, this becomes important for edification purposes, right? The name of this particular ship was called Eurydice, or Eurydice, whatever, right? 6-rate frigate, 26 guns, 25th of August, 1855 through December 1855. That's when it was used. So what happened to it after that, perhaps? Designer, John Edi. Length on lower deck, 141. Breadth, 39, meaning 39 feet, sorry. Tons, BM, 908. Tons, DISP, 921. Yard, Portsmouth. Could that be Portsmouth in Virginia, perhaps? Date launched the 5th of the 16th in 1843. Men, 24 officers, 39 petty officers, 150 seamen, 33 boys, 29 mariners. Water in tanks, 84 tons. Water in cask, 6 tons. You know what a ton is? A ton is 2,000 pounds. Salt for 140 days. Bread for 100 days. Guns. I don't even know what the MD and all this other stuff is, but they have guns on there. Fate. Founded off Isle of Wight, March 24th, 1878. Notes. Converted to training ship for ordinary seamen in 1877. So you had a slave ship that was noted for being turned into a ship for ordinary seamen. So now when they ask you, where are the slave ships? All you gotta do is point them to something like this in history. Look up this. You get this online and in books. Any questions about what we're talking about? The calculations of the slave ships? And what this is speaking of, brothers and sisters? Look this up and see what you come up with. Look up the ship. Euridice. See what you come up with. See if the information I'm presenting is pseudo or not. Next slide. Information from ship's book. The space tonnage of a ship, the weight she will be able to carry, her draft, under given loads, and the amount of free board she must have for different zones. And she conditions are all accurately calculated by the ship's architects while they are designing the vessel. You know why that becomes important, brothers and sisters? Is because it shows what happened with the ships. I'm going to take an intermission and refill my water jug. Be right back. That's why I may need a partner to do this, so that way we can help each other. But I'll be right back. Intermission. Let's go on. Thank you for that time. For 3,000 years, sea battles in the Mediterranean were decided by huge rowboats carrying waterborne armies of trained Marines. Ramming, boarding, and man-to-man fighting were the tactics of the day. Why did I sit there and put that there? And I want to sit there and show for edification purposes, right? This word here was supposed to say huge. My fault. When I typed that out of the book called Ships by Life Science Library. The space tonnage of a ship, the weight she will be able to carry, all of that is already calculated. So for 3,000 years, within the Mediterranean, which is south of Europe, which is north of Africa, and which is west of Asia, right? It speaks about the ships that was at war with each other, such as when you go into the Battle of Actium that happened between Mark Antony and Augustus. All right, next slide. From Ships, the same book, and Matter of the Industrial Revolution. In the 16th century, cannon and sail began to open the range between vessels, and for 300 years, stately, wind-powered ships of the line slugged it out broadside to broadside. With the Industrial Revolution came major changes. Now, let's point something out, please, for the dating, right? In the 16th century AD. Then it talks about and for 300 years. Do you know the 16th century is the same as the 1500s? So 300 years after that, you get the 1600s, the 1700s, and the 1800s. The slave trade era that we've been talking about. What does it say? Wind powered ships of the line slugged it out broadside to broadside. With the Industrial Revolution came major changes. What does it mean when it said they slugged it out broadside to broadside? We spoke about the pirates. You understand? Let's go on. Thomas Newcomen invents the first steam engine. It is not very useful yet, But the idea of using steam to make machines go will be important in the Industrial Revolution. And Thomas Newcomen did this in 1712, the same date of the Willie Lynch aspect. James Watt from Scotland designs a more efficient steam engine, one of the most important inventions of the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines power the first train steamboats in factories in 1769. Steamboats. You have it to where what? Steam engines. So we are beginning to see how this is playing out. Let's go on to show the connection for this here. It says Ralph Waldo Emerson and Philip Fleming in statements. The gentleman Ralph Waldo is on the left-hand side. The gentleman Philip Fleming is on the right-hand side. Let's see what Ralph's had to say. A steamship bridging the Atlantic between Old and New England. Do you know what New England is? New England is the states that we call like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. Do you see where we're going? The steamships between Old England and New England and arriving at its ports with the punctuality of a planet is a step of man into harmony with nature. Now, when he says man, we know what man he's talking about, right? Then it goes on to say, what? Now, this is the statement from Philip Fleming. For good or ill, civilization became the child of the steamship. Did you know the steamship, when you go to the presentation called From Ghana to Georgia, there were steamships that were used in the Atlantic slave trade? So when we now take the statement from Philip Fleming, speaking about the aspect of the steamship's use, he said for good or ill. What ill? Which means bad or sick, not good, would the steamship be used for in the timing we're talking about 300 years from the 16th century? You see how that connection went down? That's why it's important to study for edification purposes. Any questions about how that connection was made? Please let me know. Let's go on, if you will, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. The Titanic had elevators. Alexander Miles, 1887. Look up. The man that was given the credit for upgrading the pattern of the elevator was a black man by the name of Alexander Miles in 1887. So now the Titanic, which set sail in 1911 or 1912, right, was said by many, God can't even bring it down. That's what they were saying about the Titanic. It hit an iceberg and it sunk. That Titanic had elevators. My point in all of that is this. If, brothers and sisters, going back to the presentation that's inside of the description, from Ghana to Georgia, that the slave ship called the Wanderer became a ship that was later on used by the Navy of the Union Army during the Civil War. We already showed that Eurydice slave ship became something later on for other people. So that's what happened with the slave ships. So we want to point that out. Now, the next thing to point out, if brothers and sisters, less than 50 years or so later, they're making ships with elevators, why would somebody ask, well, what about the weight of the people on the ships with the slave ship? That was the point in all of that, because that's another, weak argument that some people try to give. Oh, it would have sunk. No, it wouldn't have. When you read about the aspect of what happened with the ships at the Battle of Actium in the year 31 BCE, those ships were not lightly, loosely made. The slave ships were not loosely made, brothers and sisters. And the Titanic, which was made less than 50 or so years after the last recorded slave ship coming to the United States. The technology that they had in the 1800s, taking it back to the 1760s when they was using steamships, was not primitive like they try to make people think. That's the point. Let's go on to the next slide. Conclusion and afterword. Merseyside Museum in England. In the Liverpool section, Liverpool was a place in England where they used to make the slave ships and build them. Transatlantic slavery. This is shown in Europe and the models of the ships. It's only on YouTube coming out of some guys out of America where they try to sit there and deny the slave trade. The world does not deny it. We went over that extensively in that video when African leaders spoke about their involvement in the slave trade and their ancestry. Check out that video from Ghana to Georgia inside the description. I listed African leaders that spoke about their ancestors' role in the slave trade. So you had Europeans talking about it, you had African leaders talking about it. Not too hard to figure out what we're dealing with. Let's go on to the next slide. Appendix. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Now, from some more information. How y'all doing, brothers and sisters? For those who've been following the format of how the channel's been going, we have the conclusion, the appendix, which we're about to get into now. So I'm asking, are there any questions or comments? Questions or comments, brothers? Questions or comments, brothers and sisters? We already saw enough comics from the people who want to sit there and teach that the slave trade didn't happen. And the opportunistic people who want to sit there and talk about they are American descendants of slaves. We want a handout. Brothers and sisters, the retribution and the atonement for what has happened to our people is not going to come from the currency that has the Illuminati pyramid on it. You understand? The retribution and the restitution and the reparation for our people is not going to come, brothers and sisters, from giving black people money so they can sit there and spend it like they did show in the Dave Chappelle show on chicken and cell phones. The restitution and reparation for our people, for those who are responsible for the fall, in part, of our people, because some of it is our fault as well. It's not going to come from their paychecks, from their quote-unquote handouts. The reason why you might see politicians today talking about reparations for black people for slavery is because this man knows his time is running out. So if I sit there and pay you off, whew, I can afford, and I'm buying them some more time. There is, like the Most High said in the scriptures, their silver nor their gold will be able to save them in the day of his wrath. So when you begin to see that fool that they have over there in the White House, who does not know what he presides over, brothers and sisters, when you begin to see the foolishness, brothers and sisters, that comes out of Congress, when they want to sit there and promote, quote unquote, gender equalification, where a boy born a boy can say one day he want to be a girl. That's sick. When the natural use of a man in marriage has been replaced with artificial insemination, when they take the clitoris of a female and try to make it into a penis. Brothers and sisters, this world has lost its scruples. Brothers and sisters, I suggest check out the information that was presented. We're not done yet. There's a couple more slides. But I hope that I did not offend anyone. I hope I did not sit there and make anyone feel uncomfortable. Why do I do that? Even though some say, oh, you shouldn't apologize for the truth. Humility trumps that. You can't present something that is harsh, that is not easily swallowed, and just then turn around and tell the people, I don't apologize for it. That's arrogance. That's the spirit that will never say, I am open to constructive criticism. And that's also a phony. Because you have then presented yourself as a person that says, I don't need to apologize, as if your stuff doesn't stink. As if you never made a typo in a presentation. As if you sat there and didn't give a date and then had to go in a comment board later on and say, this date I stand corrected is truly this date right here. The spirit that says, I don't apologize for speaking, is the same spirit that will never see the error of his or her ways. That's the same spirit that the colonial people had. Once again, you got to ask, who is fighting for who? Brothers and sisters. So, without any further ado, if we will, brothers and sisters, let us continue into the next slide and close out. Richard Greenville. He was the person who fought against the people of Roanoke and was defeated in time. This happened in the state court, North Carolina, which I can say I see more people in exile than I do see in New York. Sad when you think of it. I'll explain that in the comments because I travel back and forth to North Carolina quite often. Next slide. This is Jesse Lee Peterson. He is noted for saying that no white people came as a group and captured black people and brought black people into slavery. You ever heard of this guy right here? Jesse Peterson? He's been on YouTube for some time. A lot of people like him or the descendants of the colonial people and so forth and so on. If you follow what I'm saying with that part. Right? Let's go on. When you have to use the evidence from the white man against a black man who cited nothing, says, let's go on. John Barber, a person who worked with the Royal Africa Company in the 1680s. Let's see what a guy from the 1680s said concerning the slave trade. As the slaves came down to Florida from the inland country, they were put into a booth or prison near the beach. And when the Europeans are to receive them, they are brought onto a large plain where the ship surgeons examine every part of every one of them to the smallest member, men and women being stark naked. Such as are allowed good and sound are set on one side, marked on the breast with a red hot iron, imprinting the mark of the French, English, or Dutch companies. The branded slaves after this are returned to their former booths where they await shipment, sometimes 10 to 15 days. That's what John Barber, who worked with the Royal Africa Company. In the video, in the description, I called from Ghana to Georgia. I spoke extensively of the Royal Africa Company. Next slide. John Barbet, part 2. Then they were packed aboard the slave ships in spaces not much bigger than coffins, chained together in the dark, wet slime of the ship's bottom, choking in the stench of their own excrements. It goes on to say, the height, sometimes between decks, was only 18 inches, so that the unfortunate human beings could not turn around or even on their sides, the elevation being less than the breadth of their shoulders. And here they are usually chained to the decks by the neck and legs. In such a place, the sense of misery and suffocation is so great that the Negroes, driven to frenzy. Now that's from John Barbet, a white man who was in the 1880s and left the record of what he saw in his expeditions in what they call the Royal Africa Company. Let's go on to the next part, if we will. From Lewis to Sandoval, your reverence writes me that you would like to know whether the Negroes who are sent to your parts have been legally captured. To this I reply that I think your reverence should have no scruples on this point, because it's a matter which has been questioned by the Board of Conscience in Lisbon, which is in Portugal, and all its members are learned and conscientious men, nor do the bishops who were in Santome, Cape Verde, and here in Loando, all learned and virtuous men find fault with it. We have been here ourselves for 40 years, and there have been among us very learned fathers. Neither did they consider the trade as illicit. There we and the fathers of Brazil buy these slaves for our service without any scruple. So that's from a guy named Lewis to a guy named Sandoval. Look that up. Did we acquire them? Niggas don't even ask about that. We've been doing this 40 years. It's all good as far as that person was concerned. So I don't know what Jesse Lee Peterson is talking about, because we're citing sources. Okay. Jefferson revisited. Most significantly, the version of the Ordinance of 1784 that Jefferson supported banned the expansion of slavery into new territories. The plan failed by a single vote in the Congress. Thus, we see the fate of millions unborn hanging on the tongue of one man. That's what Jefferson said about the expansion of slavery. Later on, you see it in places like Kansas and so forth and so on, right? Let's go on. James Madison revisited. Reason why I say revisited is because they were mentioned in the video called From Ghana to Georgia. A committee reported that 2 blacks should be rated as 1 free man. This was unsatisfactory. To some, it seemed too large, to others too small. Other ratios were proposed: 3 to 1, 3 to 2, 4 to 1, and 4 to 3. To give proof of the sincerity of his professions of liberality, propose that slaves should be rated 5 to 3. That's what they call the 3/5 compromise. James Madison is the one who came up with that concept that became known as the 3/5 compromise. Next slide. New York. From the bottom of the slave ship to the bottom of the chain. Let's see what we're talking about. Amsterdam, which was later on to be known as New York, New Amsterdam. And here we see the black people coming off the ship being made to work, the bottom of such. And in New York, this is what the black man in the 1980s unfortunately became. Image and portrayal of drug dealers. There was a saying that was said concerning cigarettes with tobacco. They wanted us to pick it, now they want us to smoke it. How did we go, brothers and sisters? From the bottom of the slave ship to the bottom of the chain. When the black man is shown in movies, as you see from that one there, Paid in Full. When one of them killed the other one, and the one who did the killing can't even show himself on YouTube because of the wickedness that he's done in real life. I'm talking about. You understand? From the bottom of the slave ship to the bottom of the chain, we done went from being the oppressed to unfortunately now oppressing ourselves. We have to do better as a people. We have to not be like Washington. We can't be like Jefferson. We can't be like Franklin. We can't be like Monroe. We have to be more so like the guy who invented the elevator and the other black inventions that we know of. We have to sit there and set the tone for our future. Because what Hollywood is presenting of the black man, as you see in the movie Paid in Full, that ain't a good image. Unfortunately, it was true in the 80s, but it's not what we need to hold as a legacy. We need to change that. Just like you find white people trying to hide their fact of slavery and want that erased, which it will not be erased. We cannot erase the evil that we've done with ourselves, such as selling drugs and being disrespectful and shooting each other. We have to do better, brothers and sisters. You understand? The legacy that's being presented in magazines, brothers and sisters, Don Diva, Fed magazine, and all this other kind of stuff. We can't let that be our story. It's a sad part of our history. It's an evil part of our black history. But we got to change that. You understand? So that's something I want to point out in that regard. Giving honor and praise unto Yah, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. Thus ends this particular presentation. Hopefully people learned from it. There will be more. I do appreciate the time that people have spent on this, where I'm not going to go past 11 p.m. because it's a school night and a work night for many. All right, including myself. So subscribe to the channel, share the video. Please leave your comments inside the comment board as well, and let me know what you think. Shalom Lakem, peace to you all. Have a good night.